The dog froze so suddenly that its handler almost stumbled over the leash. It had ignored dozens of oak trees that morning without so much as a sniff, weaving patiently through the flooded woodland, as if it already knew exactly what it was looking for. But now, beneath the oldest white oak on 30 forgotten acres, it refused to move. The handler loosened the leash. The dog lowered its head, scratched gently through the damp leaves, and let out a single sharp bark that echoed beneath the canopy. Everything stopped. The forestry professor knelt immediately. He brushed aside a thin layer of leaves with gloved fingers, exposing the dark soil beneath. He dug only a few inches before pausing. His expression changed. Not excitement, recognition. Instead of digging farther, he carefully covered the spot again. Then he stood, pulled out his phone, and spoke quietly enough that only Emily Carter could hear. "Don't let anyone touch this ground until my team gets here." Emily didn't ask what he had found. She simply watched him. For the first time in nearly 8 years, someone was looking at her father's land the same way her father always had. Behind them, several neighbors who had wandered over out of curiosity exchanged amused glances. Dale Morrison folded his arms. "So that's it?" he chuckled. "All this fuss over another mushroom?" A few people laughed. Emily kept her eyes on Professor Nathan Brooks. He didn't laugh. Instead, he looked around the flooded woodland as though he had just walked into a library full of books everyone else had mistaken for firewood. Within an hour, 2 university trucks rolled onto the muddy lane. Before sunset, another vehicle arrived. It wasn't from the county. It wasn't from the state. It carried the discreet emblem of one of the most respected restaurants in the region. Nobody in Mason County understood why a chef would drive nearly 4 hours to inspect a swamp everyone had spent decades calling worthless. Not even Emily. But to understand why that chef came, you have to understand why everyone else stayed away. When Harold Carter died, people in Mason County didn't remember the years he volunteered with the volunteer fire department. They didn't remember how he spent entire weekends helping neighbors repair fences after storms. They didn't remember the vegetables he quietly left on elderly neighbors' porches every summer. Instead, they remembered the land, 30 acres along the creek that flooded almost every spring, 30 acres where corn drowned, 30 acres where soybeans struggled, 30 acres every appraiser called a liability. People spoke about Harold with affection. Then they lowered their voices. "It's a shame. He worked too hard. He just never knew when to quit." At the funeral reception, Emily stood beside a table covered with casseroles and homemade pies, thanking people as they came through the line. Dale Morrison waited until the room became quieter. "I'm sorry about your dad." Emily nodded. "Thank you." He looked through the church window toward the distant tree line. "I've still got that offer." Emily already knew what he meant. "I haven't decided anything. You don't have to today." He smiled politely. "But don't spend the next 10 years making the same mistake he did." He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder before walking away. Several people nearby had heard him. None of them disagreed. 3 weeks later, an appraisal arrived. Emily unfolded the report while sitting at the kitchen table. Harold had built nearly 40 years earlier. She read the final valuation once, then again, then a third time. The report described the property in 4 short phrases: poor agricultural productivity, seasonal flooding, limited development potential, minimal commercial value. 4 sentences. 30 years of her father's work reduced to 4 sentences. That afternoon she carried the report to the local bank. The loan officer had known Harold since high school. He adjusted his glasses before quietly sliding the papers back across the desk. "I wish these numbers looked different." Emily looked at him. "If I refinance." "Can I keep the land?" He hesitated, long enough to answer before speaking. "If I were advising my own daughter, I'd sell it." Emily stared at the appraisal. "It was my father's." "I know. And that's exactly why this is difficult." He leaned forward. "Memories are valuable. But banks can't lend against memories." He paused. "Harold left you memories. He didn't leave you an investment." The words weren't cruel. They were honest. That somehow made them hurt even more. The weeks that followed became a parade of unwanted advice. At the grocery store, one woman stopped her beside the produce section. "Honey, you're still young. You don't need to carry your daddy's burdens." Another neighbor suggested turning the land into a hunting lease. Someone else recommended selling the timber before disease ruined it. One distant cousin even offered sympathy that sounded suspiciously like relief. At least now the family can move on. Move on. As though Harold himself had become another piece of worn-out equipment sitting in the barn. Emily smiled politely through every conversation, then drove home. Every evening she walked the flooded woodland alone. Not because she knew what to do, because she couldn't bear the thought of abandoning it without understanding why her father had loved it so fiercely. One rainy Saturday, she searched the old machine shed for insurance records. Instead, she found boxes, dozens of them, each labeled carefully by year. Inside weren't tax files. They weren't receipts. They were notebooks, hundreds upon hundreds of pages. Every notebook documented something different: daily rainfall, groundwater depth, soil temperatures, leaf color, bird migrations, root growth, tree health, soil pH measured in dozens of different locations. Hand-drawn maps identified every oak and hazelnut tree by number. One notebook contained nothing but sketches of underground root systems. Another recorded nothing except fungal activity after heavy rains. Emily frowned. Who spends 30 years writing this much? She continued digging through the boxes. Near the bottom, she found the oldest notebook. Tucked inside was a faded newspaper clipping. The headline read, "European researchers successfully cultivate black truffles outside native forests." Beneath it, Harold had written one sentence: "What if everyone keeps failing because they're planting in the wrong places?" Emily sat quietly on an overturned bucket. A memory returned. She was 12 years old. Harold had been planting tiny oak saplings, one cold November afternoon. She remembered asking why he wasn't planting corn like everyone else. He smiled. "Everybody grows what the market understands today." Then he gently packed soil around the little tree. "I'd rather grow something the market won't understand for another 20 years. Back then, she thought it was one of his strange jokes. Now, she wasn't so sure. The next Saturday, the county extension office hosted its monthly agricultural meeting. Emily almost stayed home. Instead, she walked in carrying one of Harold's notebooks. Conversations gradually quieted. Not because people disliked her, because everyone already knew she had inherited Harold Carter's flooded bottomland. Extension Director Frank Benson opened the meeting by discussing fertilizer prices before moving to county drainage grants. Halfway through, he looked toward Emily. "Miss Carter, our condolences again." She thanked him. "If you decide you'd like assistance applying for drainage funding, our office would be glad to help." Emily smiled politely. "I'm not planning to drain it." The room became quiet. Frank frowned. "I'm sorry. I'm leaving the woodland exactly as it is." A farmer near the back laughed. Someone whispered loudly enough to hear, "Like father, like daughter." Emily continued, "I'm going to finish what he started." Frank looked confused. What exactly did Harold start? Emily looked down at the notebook. "I don't think anyone believed him." Another farmer chuckled. "Lucky for us." More laughter. Dale finally spoke. He wasn't smiling anymore. "You still don't know." Emily met his eyes. "Know what?" He spent 30 years trying to prove that swamp could become something it never was. He looked around the room before continuing. "Your father was one of the hardest working men I've ever known." He paused. "But hard work can't fix the wrong piece of land." Silence settled over the room. Nobody defended Harold. Because nearly everyone believed Dale was simply stating a painful truth. As the meeting ended, Emily overheard two younger farmers talking near the coffee table. "So what's she growing?" One laughed. "Hope," the other answered. "I hear it's imported from Italy." They both burst into laughter. Emily kept walking. She didn't look back. But every word followed her out to the parking lot. The jokes didn't stop there. By Monday morning, people had started calling the Carter property Carter's Swamp. The nickname spread astonishingly fast. At the feed store, someone asked whether Emily needed duck feed instead of fertilizer. At the diner, a man joked that the county should start charging admission for people wanting to visit the world's most expensive mud hole. One morning, Emily stopped for coffee before buying fencing supplies. As she reached for cream, she heard laughter from the next table. "Did you hear? She's waiting for truffles." Another man laughed. "I've got mushrooms growing behind my barn. Guess I'm sitting on a gold mine too." The table erupted. An older farmer shook his head. "No, don't laugh. Maybe she's breeding unicorns too." Even the waitress looked embarrassed. She quietly placed Emily's coffee on the counter. "I'm sorry." Emily smiled. "It's all right." "No." The waitress whispered. "It isn't." Emily left without saying another word. Outside, she sat inside her truck for several minutes. For the first time, she wondered whether everyone else might be right. Maybe grief had made her see purpose where none existed. Maybe Harold had simply refused to admit he was wrong. Maybe. She was about to spend the rest of her life defending a mistake. She drove home in silence. Then she opened another notebook. The first sentence she saw read, "If you ever begin doubting the trees, spend a day listening instead of measuring." Emily closed her eyes. She picked up her work gloves and walked back into the woods. Emily spent the rest of that afternoon exactly as the notebook instructed. She didn't carry a shovel. She didn't carry a soil probe. She didn't even bring a measuring tape. For the first time since Harold's funeral, she simply walked. The woodland sounded different when she stopped trying to solve it. Wind moved softly through the oak leaves. Water trickled across shallow channels that had existed long before anyone surveyed property lines. Woodpeckers hammered somewhere in the distance. A pair of deer slipped silently between the hazelnut trees before disappearing into the brush. She suddenly realized something. Her father had never called this place a field. He always called it the woods. Everyone else had spent 30 years judging it as farmland. Harold had never been trying to farm it. The next morning, Emily carried several notebooks onto the porch. She spread them across the table in chronological order. At first, the entries seemed random. Rainfall, tree height, soil acidity, bird sightings. Then she noticed something. Every few months, Harold drew a small blue circle beside certain trees. The same numbers appeared again, year after year. Tree 18, tree 24, tree 41, tree 373. He rarely explained why. Only short notes. Excellent root activity. Leave undisturbed. Moisture ideal. Never remove leaf litter here. Another notebook contained a rough sketch connecting those same trees with blue pencil. Almost like a map. Emily frowned. It wasn't a planting plan. It looked more like someone tracking an invisible network beneath the ground. 2 days later, she drove nearly 90 miles to the nursery listed on one of Harold's old invoices. The owner, Richard Hale, looked up from watering young saplings. "The Carter place?" He smiled before Emily even introduced herself. "I wondered if someone would eventually come. You knew my father?" Richard laughed softly. "Oh, I knew him. I also thought he was crazy." Emily smiled. "So did everybody else?" Richard disappeared into a storage room. Several minutes later, he returned, carrying a dusty ledger, almost 2 decades old. He opened it carefully. There, Harold's name. One order, 300 white oak seedlings, 100 hazelnut seedlings, every one of them inoculated before planting. Emily ran her fingers across the faded handwriting. "He really ordered them." Richard nodded. "He asked more questions than any customer I've ever had." "What kind of questions?" He wanted to know which trees would tolerate flooding, how soil chemistry affected fungal partnerships, whether root competition mattered after 15 years. Richard chuckled. "I told him nobody around here had ever asked questions like that." Emily looked up. "What did he say?" Richard smiled at the memory. He said, "That's probably why nobody around here has ever found what I'm looking for." Emily sat quietly. "So he believed it from the beginning." Richard nodded. He wasn't guessing. He had spent years reading research papers. Emily looked surprised. "My father never went to college." "No." Richard agreed. "But he read like someone who wished he had." Richard reached beneath the counter. "This belongs to you." He handed Emily a worn envelope. Inside was Harold's original handwritten planting diagram. Across the top he had written, "Don't fight the land. Ask what it wants to become." Emily folded the paper carefully. No one had ever spoken about Harold that way. Around Mason County, he was remembered as stubborn. Here, he was remembered as curious. Spring arrived with weeks of relentless rain. Fields throughout the valley flooded. Con plantas, said il. Several neighbors complained they might have to replant entire sections. Emily drove through standing water toward the woodland. The flooded creek had spread gently beneath the oaks. Instead of looking damaged, the forest looked alive. She replaced tree guards chewed by deer, straightened protective stakes around younger hazelnuts, cleared invasive vines climbing several trunks. By late afternoon, mud covered her boots almost to her knees. As she loaded tools into her truck, another pickup stopped near the gate. Dale Morrison climbed out. "You work harder every week." Emily smiled politely. "I've got plenty to do." Dale leaned against his truck. "For what?" She looked toward the trees. "For something worth finishing." He sighed. "You sound exactly like your father." Emily didn't answer. Dale wasn't finished. "You know what bothered me most about Harold?" Emily waited. "He was too smart to waste his life." He looked toward the flooded woods, but he couldn't admit he'd chosen the wrong land. Then came the sentence. Emily would replay in her mind for months. "He worked himself into the grave chasing this swamp. You don't owe it your future." His voice wasn't angry. It almost sounded compassionate. That made it even harder to ignore. Then Dale removed a folded county notice from his truck. "The Miller Creek drainage proposal is back on the agenda," he said. "Several farms upstream have reported standing water. The board is considering a connecting trench through the lowest section of this property." Emily stopped working. "You mean through the woodland?" "It would reduce flooding. It would change the water table and cut between the oldest root zones. It would make the land usable." "It is already being used." Dale looked toward the trees. "For what?" Emily did not answer. "There is a hearing in 30 days. He continued. "If you cannot show a recognized agricultural or conservation use, the county can approve the easement. You submitted the complaint. I submitted drainage data, and you sit on the advisory committee. I will tell them what I believe, which is that Harold refused to fix a problem. And now, everyone around him is paying for it." He placed the notice on the hood of her truck. "I am not destroying anything. Emily, I am fixing what your father refused to fix." After he drove away, Emily stood beside the marked trees. Until that moment, the laughter had hurt only her. The drainage trench could destroy something Harold had spent 30 years building before she even understood what it was. That evening, Emily opened the final notebook. Unlike the others, this one contained almost no measurements. Instead, it read like a journal. The handwriting had become noticeably weaker. The first page stopped her cold. "If you're reading this, I probably ran out of time." She swallowed. The next lines were written more slowly. "If nothing has happened yet, don't assume nothing is happening. Trees grow where everyone can see them. The important work happens underground." Emily turned another page. An old photograph had been tucked inside. Harold stood beside one of the very first oak saplings. The tree barely reached his shoulder. On the back he had written, "People laugh at patience because they've never seen what patience harvests." Emily wiped away a tear. Then she noticed something else inside the envelope. A folded letter. She carefully unfolded it. "Emily, if you're reading this, then you're probably wondering whether I was wrong. I wondered too, more times than I'd ever admit. Some winters I walked these woods convinced I'd wasted half my life. Some summers I nearly sold every acre. But every year the trees taught me the same lesson. The things worth growing almost always grow slower than our confidence. If I'm wrong, sell the land and forgive me. If I'm right, don't let anyone rush you. Either way, I hope you never measure your life by people who only understand quick results." Emily folded the letter slowly. For the first time since Harold died, she no longer felt like she was protecting his dream. She felt like she was finishing his work. A month later, an unfamiliar phone number appeared on her screen. Emily almost ignored it. Instead, she answered, "Emily Carter?" "Yes. My name is Professor Nathan Brooks. I'm with the State University Department of Forestry." Emily glanced at Harold's notebooks. Can I help you? I've spent the last several weeks reading a paper your father submitted to a regional forestry conference almost 20 years ago. Emily blinked. My father wrote a paper? It wasn't published. Professor Brooks admitted, but someone archived it. He proposed something that everyone dismissed. Emily leaned forward. What was that? The professor answered quietly. He believed flooded hardwood ecosystems might support long-term truffle cultivation better than drained farmland. Emily looked toward the woods. Nobody believed him. I know, Professor Brooks replied. That's why I called. He paused. Miss Carter. I think everyone may have dismissed him too quickly. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. Professor Brooks continued. I'd like permission to visit your property. Not because I expect to find truffles, he corrected himself, but because I think your father documented something the scientific community overlooked. Emily looked again at the stacks of notebooks covering her kitchen table, years of measurements, maps, observations, questions. She smiled for the first time in weeks. I think. My father has been waiting a long time for someone to read those notebooks. Professor Brooks answered softly. So have I. Professor Brooks arrived the following Thursday, just after sunrise. There were no television cameras, no reporters, no government officials. Only an aging pickup truck covered with dried mud, and a trailer carrying several cases of field equipment. Emily expected someone in a pressed university shirt. Instead, a tall man in worn hiking boots climbed out carrying a thermos and a faded leather notebook. He looked more like a forester than a professor. Before introducing himself, he stood quietly for nearly a minute, studying the woodland from the edge of the driveway. Finally, he smiled. So this is Harold Carter's forest. Emily noticed the word immediately. Forest? Professor Brooks nodded. Not many people would call it that. Emily laughed softly. They usually call it a swamp. The professor looked back toward the trees. That's because they're looking at water. I'm looking at ecology. Inside the farmhouse, Emily spread Harold's notebooks across the dining table. Professor Brooks carefully picked up the oldest volume. He didn't flip through it casually. He read each page as if afraid to miss something. After nearly an hour, he looked up. These aren't journals. Emily frowned. No, they're research. He gently tapped one of the pages. Look at this. Harold had recorded soil temperatures every Tuesday morning for almost 15 consecutive years. Another notebook tracked rainfall beside fungal observations. Another compared tree growth with groundwater levels. Professor Brooks shook his head. Do you know how rare this is? Emily smiled. My father just thought he was taking notes. The professor looked at her. No. He was collecting longitudinal field data. He paused. Most universities can't afford someone patient enough to do this. Several graduate students joined them later that morning. Emily expected sophisticated instruments. Instead, they carried flags, measuring tapes, soil cores, and sample bags. One student whispered while looking through the notebooks. I've never seen records this complete. Another quietly added. He even mapped individual root zones. Professor Brooks smiled. That's because Harold wasn't farming crops. He was studying relationships. Emily asked, relationships? The professor nodded. Trees, water, soil, fungi. Every living thing down there depends on every other living thing. He pointed beneath the forest floor. Most of the real forest exists where nobody can see it. The team spent the day collecting samples, not randomly. They followed Harold's maps almost exactly. Every tree marked with a blue circle received special attention. Emily noticed one graduate student smiling. What is it? He held up a thin root no thicker than a shoelace. Tiny white threads covered its surface. I was hoping we'd see this. Emily leaned closer. What is it? Professor Brooks answered. Mycorrhizae. He smiled. Healthy ones. Emily still looked confused. The professor knelt beside her. Imagine the tree has millions of tiny business partners. The fungus helps gather nutrients. The tree shares sugars. Neither becomes this healthy without the other. Emily looked toward Harold's notebooks. So Dad was measuring. The partnership. Professor Brooks nodded. Exactly. News spread across Mason County before lunchtime. Someone had seen university trucks parked at Carter's Swamp. Within hours, pickups began slowing along the county road. Drivers pretended to check fences while watching the professor's work. By evening, the diner buzzed with speculation. I heard they're drilling for oil. No, I heard they're testing contamination. Another farmer laughed. They're probably trying to figure out why Harold wasted 30 years. Dale Morrison stirred his coffee. They'll leave disappointed. A younger farmer looked up. You really think so? Dale shrugged. I've known that ground my whole life. If there was something valuable out there, someone would have found it years ago. 3 days later, Professor Brooks requested permission to return. This time, he explained, I'd like to collect root samples from several of the oldest oaks. Emily agreed. As they walked deeper into the woodland, the professor suddenly stopped beside a massive white oak. He studied the trunk, then compared it with Harold's hand-drawn map. A slow smile spread across his face. What? Emily asked. Your father wasn't planting randomly. She looked around. The trees appeared natural, almost wild. Professor Brooks pointed across the woodland. Notice the spacing. Emily squinted. Then she saw it. The oldest oaks formed loose clusters. Between them stood carefully positioned hazelnuts. Farther away, younger replacement trees filled tiny gaps. What does that mean? It means, the professor smiled. He wasn't planting a forest. He was designing one. Late that afternoon, as the students packed their equipment, Dale's pickup rolled slowly through the open gate. He climbed out with his hands in his pockets. So, he looked around at the sample bags. Found the treasure yet? One graduate student lowered his eyes. Professor Brooks answered calmly, We found something interesting. Dale grinned. Interesting? Doesn't pay taxes? Emily remained silent. Dale turned toward her. You know, I still have that offer. She frowned. What offer? The land. I'll buy all 30 acres. Emily smiled politely. I'm not selling. Dale nodded as though he'd expected that answer. You should think about it. He looked toward the muddy woodland. If these professors leave next week, you'll still be standing here with a swamp. Then he climbed back into his truck and drove away. Professor Brooks watched until the dust settled. Finally he spoke. People like him aren't foolish. Emily looked surprised. No, they're practical. He paused. The problem with practical people is they sometimes stop believing in anything that takes longer than 5 years. Emily glanced toward the oldest oak. My father believed. Professor Brooks smiled. And that's why I'm here. Nearly a month passed before the laboratory results arrived. Professor Brooks called Emily early one morning. I'd like you to come to campus. His voice sounded unusually calm. Too calm. Emily drove almost 2 hours without turning on the radio. Inside the forestry laboratory, microscope images covered a large monitor. Professor Brooks pointed to the screen. These samples came from your property. Emily nodded. They're alive. What is? The fungal network. He changed to another image. It has survived for years. Emily frowned. So, my father succeeded? Professor Brooks smiled. He succeeded at the hardest part. Emily felt hope rising for the first time. Then there are truffles? The professor held up one finger. Not so fast. He walked toward a whiteboard. A healthy fungal network doesn't guarantee mature truffles. It only tells us. It's finally worth searching. Emily looked at him. How do we search? Professor Brooks smiled. We don't. We let someone with a much better nose do it. Emily looked puzzled. A trained truffle dog. The professor folded Harold's map carefully. If your father was right. He looked toward the photograph of the Carter woodland, pinned to the board. The next visit could change everything. The morning of the search dawned cool and unusually quiet. Word had spread across Mason County for nearly a week. Not because the university had announced anything, because people talked. By 8 o'clock, pickup trucks lined both sides of the county road outside the Carter property. Some people stood leaning against tailgates with steaming coffee. Others brought folding chairs as though they were attending a parade. One man laughed while unfolding his chair. I haven't seen this much excitement since the county fair. Another answered, At least the fair has prizes. Several people chuckled. Emily noticed familiar faces. The loan officer who had advised her to sell, 2 county commissioners, several farmers from the extension meeting. Even the waitress from the diner stood quietly near the back of the crowd. She smiled gently when Emily looked her way. It was the first smile Emily had received there in months. Dale Morrison arrived last. He parked near the entrance, climbed out slowly, and folded his arms. He wasn't smiling as much anymore, but he still didn't believe. Professor Brooks stepped out of the university truck carrying Harold's hand-drawn map inside a weatherproof folder. The graduate students unloaded flags, GPS equipment, sample containers, and cameras. Then another truck arrived. Its trailer carried a single metal kennel. Inside sat a golden-colored dog. Alert, but perfectly calm, the handler opened the door. The dog stepped onto the ground without barking. It wasn't excited. It looked focused. Emily watched as the handler clipped on a long leash. "What's his name?" "Bruno." Professor Brooks smiled. "He's found truffles in orchards from Oregon to North Carolina." Emily looked down at Bruno. "And if he doesn't find anything?" The handler answered honestly. "Then he doesn't find anything." He shrugged. Dogs don't care about hope. They only care about scent. Before anyone entered the woodland, Professor Brooks gathered everyone together. His voice remained calm. "I need everyone to understand something. If Bruno alerts, nobody crosses the marked line." He looked around the crowd. "Not because we're trying to keep secrets, but because one careless boot can damage years of underground growth." Someone near the back muttered, "Years?" Professor Brooks nodded. "Possibly decades." Dale shook his head. "That's a mighty expensive mushroom." Several people laughed. A county commissioner approached Emily before the search began. "The drainage vote remains scheduled for tomorrow morning," he said. "If the university has no finding by sunset, the board will proceed with the current recommendation." Emily looked toward the oldest oaks. "Then give them the full day." Professor Brooks did not respond to Dale. He simply nodded to the handler. Bruno lowered his nose. The search began. For the first 15 minutes, nothing happened. The dog walked steadily beneath one oak after another, sometimes pausing, sometimes circling, never barking, never scratching. Emily's heartbeat slowed. Maybe this was how it ended. Not with failure. Simply, nothing. Behind her, someone whispered, "Told you." Another answered, "They're going to spend all day chasing ghosts." Dale glanced at his watch. "I've got high to bail." He smiled toward Emily. "Let me know when the miracle starts." A few people laughed again. One man placed a plastic container of grocery store mushrooms on the hood of Emily's truck. "Here is your first harvest," he said. "Saved you another 30 years. Emily looked at the container. "You should keep it." "Why?" "You may need something to eat while you wait." The laughter weakened. Emily turned back toward the search. Professor Brooks ignored every comment. Instead, he compared Bruno's path with Harold's maps. The dog had already crossed several locations Harold marked with blue circles. Each time Bruno hesitated slightly. Each time he continued walking. One graduate student frowned. "Why doesn't he stop?" Professor Brooks looked thoughtful. "Because he smells something, but not enough." Emily looked at him. "So that's good? It means we're close." 30 minutes later, Bruno suddenly turned toward a younger stand of hazelnuts. He circled twice, lowered his nose, scratched lightly. The handler knelt. He brushed aside leaves. Nothing. Bruno sniffed again, then calmly walked away. The crowd behind them burst into laughter. One farmer slapped another on the shoulder. "Guess the dog's hungry." Another called out, "I've seen beagles find more than that." Even Dale laughed. "I almost feel sorry for the professor." Professor Brooks simply marked the location with a small blue flag. Emily looked confused. "Why mark it?" "Because Bruno didn't make a mistake. He told us something." "What?" "That scent exists here. It just isn't mature." He smiled. "Your father called this area the transition zone." Emily's eyes widened. "You remember that?" "I remember everything your father wrote." The search continued deeper into the woodland. Now even the spectators had grown quieter. The jokes became less frequent. People were watching more carefully. Bruno's pace slowed. Every few yards he stopped to sniff. The handler loosened the leash. Professor Brooks looked down at Harold's map, then back at the trees. Finally, he smiled. This is exactly where he'd take us. Emily frowned. What do you mean? He designed the woodland to mature from the outside in. She stared at him. You're saying? I think Harold expected the oldest colony to be here. He pointed toward a towering white oak nearly 3 feet across. One Harold had numbered simply, Triachtim, the same tree that appeared in notebook after notebook, the same tree beside which Harold had written only 3 words. Never disturb roots. Bruno walked straight toward it. His pace slowed, then slower still. He circled once, twice, 3 times. The forest became perfectly still. Even birds seemed to disappear. The dog froze. Its tail stiffened. Its ears lifted. The handler whispered, "Nobody move." Emily stopped breathing. Bruno lowered his nose one final time. Then, he barked. Once. Loud. Sharp. Certain. The handler immediately raised one hand. Alert. Professor Brooks stepped forward without speaking. He knelt beside the tree. Instead of digging quickly, he gently removed leaves 1 handful at a time. 5 inches of dark soil. Nothing. Someone behind the crowd laughed nervously. False alarm. Another agreed. I knew it. Professor Brooks continued. 6 inches. Still nothing. Emily looked down. Maybe this really was the end. The professor paused. His fingers disappeared beneath loose soil. Then, he smiled. Not broadly, quietly, like a man recognizing an old friend. He reached into the earth and slowly lifted something no larger than a baseball. Dark, rough, covered with tiny diamond-shaped scales. No one spoke. Professor Brooks didn't celebrate. He handed it silently to the handler. The handler closed his eyes, raised it to his nose, inhaled once. His expression changed instantly. He looked back at the professor. I've smelled this before. Professor Brooks nodded. So have I. Neither man said another word. Instead, Professor Brooks placed the truffle into a sterile evidence container. He sealed it carefully, then turned toward the crowd. Nobody enters this area. Dale stepped forward. Hold on. He pointed toward the small black object. That's what everybody's excited about? Professor Brooks calmly handed him the sealed container. Open it. Dale looked puzzled. You serious? Yes. Dale twisted the lid. The moment the aroma escaped, his confident smile faded. He leaned closer, then frowned. What is that smell? The handler answered quietly. The smell chefs spend fortunes chasing. Dale slowly closed the lid. For the first time all morning, he had nothing to say. The man who had joked that Michelin might someday serve mud now stood beside a specimen that had brought a celebrated chef 4 hours to Harold's woodland. The laughter was gone, not because everyone suddenly believed, but because nobody knew what to believe anymore. Professor Brooks finally broke the silence. This is only a field identification. The laboratory will verify the species. He looked around the crowd. But whether people believed Harold Carter or not, he gently rested one hand on the trunk of the old oak. This forest has just answered the first question. Now there was only one question left. Had Harold Carter spent 30 years chasing a dream? Or had Mason County spent 30 years laughing at a man who was right? The specimen gave Professor Brooks enough evidence to request a temporary delay, but the county refused to cancel the hearing without laboratory confirmation. The drainage vote would proceed the next morning. The laboratory worked through the night. To Emily, every hour felt like a month. Every morning she woke before sunrise. Not because she expected answers, because waiting had become impossible. She walked the woodland exactly as Harold always had, never stepping near the marked oak, never disturbing the soil, only watching, listening, trusting. The crowd was gone now. The folding chairs had disappeared. The county road was quiet again, but the whispers hadn't stopped. At Miller's Diner, people argued over coffee instead of weather. I heard they found one. My cousin says it wasn't a truffle. I heard the university planted it. Another man snorted. You think professors have time to bury mushrooms in somebody's swamp? A third shook his head. Maybe it's one of those foreign varieties. Dale sat silently in the corner booth. Someone looked at him. You still buying the Carter place? Dale shrugged. If the lab says they're wrong, I'll make another offer. And if they're right? He stared into his coffee. We'll see. It was the first time anyone had heard uncertainty in his voice. The county meeting room was full before 9 the next morning. Farmers supporting the drainage project sat on one side. Emily, Professor Brooks, and 2 university researchers sat on the other. Dale spoke first. He presented photographs of flooded fields and planting delays. No one wants to destroy anything valuable, he said. But county decisions cannot be based on speculation. One unidentified specimen should not outweigh the needs of working farms. Professor Brooks placed Harold's enlarged maps on the table. The proposed trench intersects elevated root zones supporting a mature fungal network. He said, changing the water table may destroy decades of biological development. You said may. Dale replied, yes. So you cannot prove the trench will destroy it. No. And you cannot prove it will not. At 9:52, Emily's phone vibrated. Laboratory services appeared on the screen. Professor Brooks listened to the caller, asked 2 questions, and opened the report that arrived by email. Then he stood. The specimen is tuber melanosporum, he said. Most people in the room did not understand the Latin name. Emily looked at him. What does that mean? Professor Brooks turned toward her. It means your father was right. 30 years of work and 8 years of ridicule collapsed into those 5 words. Emily's tears came before she realized she was crying. The professor continued. The specimen is a mature Perigord black truffle. Root samples confirm compatible mycorrhizal colonization in several elevated zones. Harold Carter's measurements of soil pH, drainage, moisture, and temperature closely match our independent results. One researcher placed photographs beside Harold's notebooks. If these records had arrived without a name, she said, we would have assumed they came from a long-term university field station. The drainage proposal was suspended, pending a full ecological review. Dale raised his hand with the others. The man who had initiated the project was now publicly voting to stop it. News spread before Emily even reached home. The university hadn't issued a press release. Someone had seen the lab team celebrating. Someone else overheard a phone call. By evening, the local newspaper's website carried a short headline, University confirms rare black truffle on Carter property. The article was shared hundreds of times. By morning, television stations were calling. Agricultural magazines requested interviews. Food writers wanted photographs. Emily politely declined almost all of them. Professor Brooks asked why. She smiled. My father didn't spend 30 years growing something, just so I could spend the next 30 talking about it. 1 week later, another call arrived. This time the number carried an area code Emily didn't recognize. My name is Daniel Laurent. I'm the executive chef at Le Chien. Emily apologized. I'm afraid I don't know the restaurant. Daniel laughed. That's all right. I know your Forest. Professor Brooks happened to be sitting at the kitchen table reviewing Harold's notebooks. The moment he heard the restaurant's name, he looked up immediately. Emily covered the phone. Do you know him? The professor nodded slowly. Very well. He doesn't travel for publicity. He travels for ingredients. Daniel continued. I'll be nearby this Friday. I'd like permission to visit. Emily hesitated. What exactly are you hoping to see? The chef answered honestly. I don't want to see a truffle. I want to see whether your father built something that can keep producing them. Friday morning, a black SUV rolled quietly into the Carter driveway. Only one person stepped out. No photographers. No assistant. Daniel Laurent wore faded jeans, hiking boots, and a waxed canvas jacket. He looked more like a wildlife guide than a Michelin-starred chef. The first thing he did surprised Emily. He didn't shake hands. He looked toward the woodland. Can we walk first? For nearly an hour, nobody talked. Daniel paused every few minutes. He picked up leaves, examined bark, knelt to smell the soil. Sometimes, he simply stood still with his eyes closed. Finally, Emily asked, "What are you looking for?" Daniel smiled. "Evidence. Of truffles?" "No." He looked toward the towering white oaks. "Of patience." Emily frowned. "I don't understand." Daniel pointed toward the forest. "I've bought truffles from France, Italy, Spain, Oregon." He gently touched the trunk of the oldest oak. "You know what they all have in common?" She shook her head. "Someone planted trees they would never fully benefit from." He smiled. "Great truffles are usually grown by people who accept that someone else might harvest the reward." Emily looked down. "That's exactly what happened here." Daniel nodded. "Your father understood something most investors never do. He wasn't planting for profit. He was planting for legacy." Professor Brooks quietly smiled. "That's the best description I've heard yet." Near the marked oak, Professor Brooks carefully uncovered one mature truffle that had already been documented for research. Daniel leaned closer. He closed his eyes, took one slow breath. When he opened them, he looked almost emotional. "I've crossed the Atlantic to buy truffles that didn't smell this good." Emily laughed softly. "You can tell that just by smelling it?" Daniel smiled. "A chef can smell the difference between something grown and something cared for." He looked around the woodland once more. "This place has been cared for." The forest was silent. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Daniel turned toward Emily. "I didn't come here to buy your land." Emily looked surprised. "No, I came because I'd like to buy the next 10 years. He smiled. "If you'll let me." Daniel's words hung in the air. Emily wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. "The next 10 years?" Daniel nodded. "I don't want the land. I don't want the trees. I don't even want exclusive access to your property." He smiled. "I want the privilege of buying what this forest produces." Emily looked at Professor Brooks. The professor simply folded his arms. "This is your decision." Daniel continued. "I've spent 25 years buying truffles. I know the difference between a lucky discovery and a healthy ecosystem." He looked around the woodland. "What your father built cannot be recreated next season. It can't be rushed. And once people understand what exists here, they'll spend years trying to copy it." He paused. "But they'll always be behind." Emily asked the question everyone else would have asked first. "How much are you offering?" Daniel smiled. "You're asking the wrong question." She looked confused. "The important question isn't what I'll pay for the first harvest. It's what your father created." He knelt beside the old oak. "This woodland isn't valuable because of one truffle. It's valuable because it can produce thousands. Carefully, over decades." He stood. "I'm offering a partnership, not a purchase." They spent the afternoon walking through the property. Daniel never once asked how many acres the Carter farm covered. He never asked about taxes. He never asked about zoning. Instead, he wanted to know, when were the replacement oaks planted? Which areas flood longest? Which trees did Harold refuse to disturb? Emily answered from memory. Whenever she hesitated, she opened one of Harold's notebooks. Daniel smiled every time. "I've met farmers who remember everything. I've met scientists who document everything." He gently rested his hand on one notebook. "I've never met someone who became both." Before leaving, Daniel handed Emily a simple one-page proposal. No lawyers, no complicated language. Only one sentence mattered. "Le Chêne requests first purchasing rights to all harvestable Carter woodland black truffles for the next 10 years at premium market pricing." Emily looked up. "You trust this place that much?" Daniel smiled. "I trust patience." He looked toward the trees. "And your father had more of it than anyone I've never met." The story exploded. National newspapers picked it up. Agricultural journals wrote about Harold's notebooks. Food magazines called the Carter Woodland one of the most unusual truffle sites documented in the region. The university announced a long-term research partnership. Students began visiting each spring to study the forest. People who had laughed for years now brought their children to the edge of the property. "This is where they found them." "No." An older resident corrected quietly. "This is where they finally realized what Harold had been doing." The difference mattered. Not everyone changed immediately. Some still insisted Harold had simply been lucky. Others claimed climate change had somehow created the truffles. One man argued that anyone could have done the same thing. Professor Brooks smiled when he heard that. During a public lecture at the county extension office, he held up one of Harold's notebooks. This journal contains more than 18 years of observations. He flipped another page. Every rainfall, every soil reading, every planting decision, every replacement tree. He looked around the crowded room. If this was luck, it's the most organized luck I've ever studied. The audience laughed, not at Harold, at themselves. A month later, the County Agricultural Board invited Emily to speak. It was the same meeting room where people had once laughed when she refused to drain the woodland, the same folding chairs, the same coffee urn, even many of the same faces, only the silence had changed. Chairman Frank Benson stood before anyone else could speak. Before we begin, I believe this county owes the Carter family something. He turned toward Emily. When Harold Carter proposed managing flooded woodland, instead of forcing it into row crops, we judged him by the wrong measure. He paused. We measured corn, when we should have been measuring vision. He looked down briefly. We also owe you an apology. The room remained completely silent. Frank continued, when you chose to continue your father's work, many of us assumed you were refusing reality. He looked around the room. The reality was that we failed to understand what we were looking at. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, the room slowly filled with applause. Not loud, not dramatic, but sincere. Emily noticed several people avoiding her eyes. They didn't know what to say, because there wasn't much left to say. After the meeting ended, Dale Morrison waited outside on the courthouse steps. He held his cap in both hands. Emily almost walked past him. Instead, she stopped. For several seconds, Dale said nothing. Finally, he spoke. I've practiced this conversation for 2 weeks. Emily smiled faintly. It doesn't get easier? No. He shook his head. It gets harder. He looked toward the distant tree line. I spent years believing I understood good land. I judged every acre by how much corn it could grow. He laughed quietly. Turns out, I only understood one kind of value. Emily didn't interrupt. Dale took a slow breath. I told your father he was wasting his life. I told you he left you a burden. I also pushed a drainage plan through ground. I never took the time to understand. He lowered his eyes. I was wrong. He handed Emily a signed letter withdrawing his support for any trench, crossing the Carter property, and offering an alternate route along his north field. The apology mattered, but changed behavior mattered more. Emily thought about every joke, every whisper, every offer to buy the property, every laugh in the diner, every meeting where people had pitied Harold. Then she remembered something from the last letter. Don't measure your life by people who only understand quick results. She smiled gently. My father would have forgiven you. Dale looked surprised. Would he? Emily nodded. He never planted those trees to prove anyone wrong. He planted them because he believed they belonged there. Dale looked toward the woods one last time. I wish I'd understood him while he was alive. So the first commercial harvest was intentionally small. Professor Brooks insisted on protecting the ecosystem. Daniel Laurent agreed immediately. We're not harvesting truffles. He told his kitchen staff, we're harvesting trust. Each truffle was cleaned by hand, wrapped individually, packed inside handcrafted wooden boxes. Every box carried the same name, burned into the lid. Carter Woodland Reserve. Daniel refused to change it. One of his managers suggested something more elegant, something French. Daniel shook his head. No. The name people need to remember is Carter. Several weeks later, one of Daniel's signature tasting menus changed. Near the center of the menu appeared a simple description. Fresh pasta with black truffles from Carter Woodland Reserve, Mason County. Beneath it, in smaller print, were 6 words. In honor of Harold Carter's vision, Daniel never told Emily he had added that line. She discovered it herself when a framed copy arrived in the mail. There was no letter, only the menu. She stared at it for a long time before quietly placing it inside Harold's final notebook, right beside the photograph of the tiny oak sapling. The next Sunday morning, Emily drove to the small cemetery overlooking the valley. She carried the frag menu under one arm. The grass around Harold's headstone had just been cut. She knelt and gently leaned the frame against the granite. For a long time, she said nothing. Wind moved softly through the maple trees surrounding the cemetery. Finally, she smiled. "You were never growing mushrooms, Dad." She looked toward the hills where the woodland lay hidden beyond the creek. "You were growing time." A tear rolled down her cheek. "And you were right." She stood quietly before leaving. As she reached her truck, she looked back one final time. The morning sun had broken through the clouds, casting long beams of light across the cemetery and the distant forest beyond. People would probably remember the truffles. The university would remember the research. The chefs would remember the flavor. But Emily knew the truth. The greatest thing Harold Carter had ever grown wasn't hidden beneath the roots of old oak trees. It was the courage to believe in something long enough for the rest of the world to finally understand it.